We are going to enter back into the hearings of submissions, which we've done in several parts today. Let me just bring that up. Yeah, so the hearing of submissions, proposed Linklater Reserve dog on leash area. We have one submitter online and then one more in the gallery. The balance have still not confirmed, so we may have several that we don't hear from until others that have actually indicated their desire to be heard after 4 o'clock and one after 4:30. So we should be able to get through the balance of our committee work. We'll see how we go before, but we're still open to having items deferred. For submitters, welcome. Thank you very much for your submissions and your chance to come in today. We appreciate wishing to be heard to speak to your submission. We have 5 minutes allocated to everybody. If there was additional information you wish to add even further, you're more than welcome to have that tabled or circulated to the administrators to be included for our information. Yes, and if there's time for questions at the end, that's as long as there's at least a minute remaining, we can enter into asking if there's any questions from members. But otherwise, we're going to go into you, Cam. Cam is online. Cam Horgan, submission 479. And when you're ready, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Kia ora. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for your time. Look, I am a Linklater Reserve user. I'm not a dog owner, but use Linklater regularly. I'm one of the members of Manawatu Tararua Disc Golf, and there is, I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a disc golf course on Linklater Reserve, and it's the only free-to-play and easy public access disc golf course in the Manawatu area. So, look, my thoughts on it is I don't support the change, and the reason for that is that the current proposed fence area would heavily impact the current disc golf course. So disc golf is a thriving sport in Manawatu, and the park averages around 200 rounds a month. That can go up and down, up and obviously in their sunny weather. And the proposed fence line would cut off our hole 6 basket area and also cut off the tee pad of hole 7. So Manawatu Tararua Disc Golf has played amongst dog walkers for several years. There's obviously been the odd incident with dogs, as you do with frisbees and dogs, but nothing of great significance. So that's sort of my through on that. I've got information to back up in regards to the amount of users on the park as well, if needed.
Great. You open for questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll open it up if there are any. Councillor Hapata.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Cam. So do you have any instance where you've had dogs that have interrupted your games of disc golf?
Oh, look, the odd time, but at the end of the day, it's a bit of give and take, really. To be fair, the club has always seen it as a multi-use park, and we always give way to walkers and dog owners, and there's a bit of mutual respect, really. So I don't see it as much of an issue, to be fair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Cam. There's no further questions. Thank you for coming and making yourself available today to speak to your submission.
No problem. Thank you for your time.
It now moves us to Sally Doherty, submission number 450. Welcome. Just to your right on the console is a button which you can press, which will just amplify your mic. That's the one. Welcome.
Awesome. I don't think the Mayor here is the Mayor here?
No, he's not.
Okay, all right. Kia ora, councillors. My name is Sally Doherty, and I'm speaking in support of keeping all of Linklater off lead. Now, the petition made 2 major claims: major safety concerns on the park, and that it's not a park for everyone. Today, I'm going to speak to the association's claims that I quote, "The current policy of education encouragement is not working in the park." I'm going to speak to the data, and I'm also going to speak to your process. So let me start with the data. I know that you have recently got the FY25 data. I'm going to speak to FY24. In that year, there were 3 dog attacks on Linklater. In the wider Manawatu, Palmerston North statistics shows that there were 141 dog attacks in the area. But this is not apples for apples. You actually have to compare the dog attacks actually in the park. And for that, you need to know how many people go to the park per day with their dog. So I asked council, approximately how many people go to the park each day with their dog? My answer was, we don't know this data, we can't tell you, which I thought was surprising, given that you're doing the analysis around how safe the park is or not. So I've used your report. I've done my own analysis. Out of the approximately 1,200 people that you surveyed, you asked several questions. Do you take your dog to Linklater? How often do you go, and what do you do there? When I extrapolate that out, there are 360 approximately dog visits with a human per day. Over the course of the year, you can imagine that's a very high number. But I'm going to be really conservative. I'm going to actually halve that number. So over the course of a year, that's 65,000 people going to the park with a dog. There are 3 recorded attacks in FY24. That's 1 attack per 21,000 visits. So 99.99% of the time, it's a very safe place to be. It's actually safer inside the park than outside the park. I'm going to go down one more level into the Kelvin Grove Association itself, who were highly critical of uncontrolled dogs in the park. In the last 2 weeks on the Kelvin Grove Association Facebook site, they have posted 3 uncontrolled roaming dogs in their area in the last 2 weeks. In 2024, there were 1,381 roaming and uncontrolled dogs outside of the park in Palmerston North. If you can't see where the problem is, then there is an issue. So how did the council respond to the surveys? Well, you worked off unvalidated assumptions. You have multiple mentions in your report saying, but this doesn't address the safety issues. Safety issues raised by the Residents Association that you did not validate or check. Your pros and cons consist mainly of subjective statements. There is no data in your analysis. You say things like, this decision might result in reputational risk if we ignore the majority. Another disadvantage, you say, this doesn't address the association's request. That's a disadvantage. That's 57 people. Your presentation and interpretation of results is also misleading. You have a pie chart. The pie chart is called, where do people want fences? And I sat back and I thought, oh, that's interesting. They do want fences. But no, in the small print, it's a follow-up question to the people who voted yes to on-lead designated areas. Out of 1,200 people, that was only 274 people. Of those, 66 people actually suggested around the play equipment only. Let me be clear, that's 3 swings, a plane and a tractor. But your strategy team, their interpretation was, this constitutes a quarter of the reserve. I don't know who's doing the math, but that does not make sense to me. Now, the options you have proposed, you have 7 options. You have chosen to put the boundary for, you've split the park in half. You've chosen the second most impactful and significant change out of 7 options. Then you've asked for feedback on a significant change. That is called anchoring. You have anchored the community in a very extreme change and said, what do you think? And of course, people are going to try and claw back whatever they can by saying, could we just move it? 1 tree by 1 boundary, could we just put it here? To try and actually mitigate the change that you're putting forward without any real problem statement. These suggestions that people are making are not endorsements as you are showing them to be in your report. Remember, in your first survey, 67% of people did not support the on-lead changes. That is the most specific data that you've got to the real question, which is, should we make these changes or not? You have been circulating photos and personal stories, which I know aren't nice, and I have seen them, but we know, whilst powerful, photos and images and stories can distort perception and policy making if it's not balanced with objective data. These examples can create a false sense of crisis, and this is what's happened. It's called the affect bias, and it's probably the most strategic thing the association has done.
Sally, I just highlighting your time's expired, so if I can encourage you just to
Wrap
round
up.
up your final points. Yeah.
I'm sure the council will talk about compromise, but a compromise only works if there's a real problem. There is not. Meeting halfway between facts and exaggeration isn't compromise, it's distortion. So in summary, your process lacks rigour and validity. You are using 57 petition signatures and disproportionately applying weight. Your analysis of the data shows that Linklater is a safe place, 99.999% using your analysis. You need to do better, council, at using real data and making policies out of real data. The majority voted no on lead changes. I vote option 7, keep it as is. Bring back the faith that I have that you will make decisions based on real problem statements and real data. Keep up with education and signage and use the $62,000 where there is a real problem.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you. Great. Again, we'll just pause on the hearing of submissions. Just to update again from members, some of the ones that have been noted in our order paper had indicated in their written submission wishing to be heard. There has been some non-responses, and when we've tried to confirm time, so that's hence why they're in the bottom end of the list. And so there could be a portion of these that don't end up attending. We do know that there's been at least 2 submitters wishing to be heard after 4 o'clock. So now we'll pause and continue with the balance of our work schedule as much as we can until after the afternoon break. So that brings us into calling on Steve Patterson, who I believe is in the link span, for his report. The Treasury report, item 10, 12 months ending 30th of June 25. And we'll just give a minute or two for him to come through. Just like that. Thank you, Steve.
Mr. Chair,
Floor's yours when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. Not much I need to say about this report, to be honest. This report's on the 12 months activity for the Treasury as usual, in similar format to normal. Council at the start of the year, as part of the budget process, determined how much additional debt should be required. As you've seen through the earlier reports, we didn't need to raise quite that much, in fact about just over 20 million less than that. The budget made assumptions about the level of interest that would be required to fund that debt. Of course, that was lower because of the lower level of debt, but also because the average interest rate that we incurred was about 4.3% against the budget assumption of 5%. Excuse me. The net debt to revenue ratio, which is the key one that we measure at the end of the year, was 150%, compared with the council's maximum limit that we've got of 250. The Treasury function operated throughout the year in a way which had support from the consultants that we use to judge what's the most appropriate path, what sort of risk profiles we should adopt in consistency with the Council's Treasury policy, and there were no breaches of that during the course of the year. So that's all from me. Any questions?
Thank you, Steve. There are. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Steve. I just wanted some clarity around the net debt position. In our previous end-year financial report on page 34, it said our net debt was 281.3 million. And then on page 118 of your report, it's got that bottom figure as 293.3 million.
Yes.
But then on the next page, it's got 283. But I'd noted that the way that right-hand column on the table in 3.3 on page 118, where we've got the 303.4 million, then it says less 12 and says 293.3 million, which doesn't seem like the right maths.
Yeah. I think the position is there is 293.3 million of net debt. The council's gross debt overall is 305.3. 12 million of that relates to the airport, borrowed on their behalf, so that makes the 293.3. I'll double check the other table later. But in terms of the figures in the previous report that you had, there's also deductions now made, as you'll see on the bottom of page 119, for the value of the local government funding agency borrowing notes that we hold, bring it back to 283.8. And then in some calculations, we also deduct the amount of cash that's held by the council at the end of the year, and that's the difference between the 283.8 and the figure that we're showing in the quarterly report.
So which one should we go by? Or should we go by the 293.3 that's on the table there as being the...
It sort of sometimes depends on the purpose we're using it for, but for the purposes of, for today, I'd be suggesting that you use the 283.8 as a reasonable number. We've got a very small amount of cash that's held, but if you're looking at the long-term debt position of the council, then that 283.8 is the net position.
Lovely.
From my
Thanks,
perspective.
Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. There's no further questions. Appreciate you presenting this report. I'm happy to move as the chair. The council note the performance of the council's activity for the 12 months ending 30th of June 2025, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up to any comments. There being none, I'd now like to invite a vote. That's passed 12 votes for unanimously. Thank you. That moves us to item 11, which is Waste Management and Minimisation Bylaw 2025, deliberations of submissions, and welcome Peter Ridge, the Acting Manager for Strategy and Policy. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou. I'm happy to take this report largely as read, perhaps just to give a very brief overview. We completed the consultation process earlier this year. We received 20 written submissions and 3 oral submissions. The analysis of these is contained in attachment 1. What we're recommending is that the council adopts the draft bylaw and administration manual with the changes as shown in attachments 2 and 3. So most of these changes are the ones that we proposed in our consultation document, though there are a few additional changes which have come about through the consultation process. Perhaps the most notable of those is related to the provisions regarding a site waste management and minimisation plan for construction and demolition waste. I won't go into the details unless there are questions that I'm happy to answer, but in summary, the proposal that we set out in the consultation document proved to be more impractical than we expected and was unlikely to make a significant improvement for construction and demolition waste diversion. We did some checking around to see what other councils do, and one example we found suggested a significantly different approach in Hawke's Bay, where they use I guess you describe it as an advanced education approach, but where they work with construction, demolition, waste facilities, material suppliers, and the building sector to develop initiatives that enable them to divert materials on site. An example of this is where the material supplier will provide a bag when plasterboard is sold, and so offcuts on the site can be gathered up in that bag, easily collected and taken to a processing facility for diversion. So these initiatives give us some confidence that there are workable models that we could develop here in Palmerston North, and we've had some initial conversations with the Central Environmental Facility in Fielding, where they expressed they would be interested in such an initiative. So we're looking at that as an alternative to what we proposed in the bylaw, taking a non-regulatory approach, one which we believe will be significantly more effective than what we had set out. And the rest are mostly minor changes, but happy to take questions on anything you have.
Thank you, Peter. We do have questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Peter. You may be aware we had public comment criticising the advice to remove the construction and demolition waste from the bylaw. Did you have any comment to the comment, I suppose?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it was a very, what I would say is Chris Tierschrell, who spoke, spoken with him many times around the consultation process and on this proposal. So we've had some really good conversations around what could work and what might not work. What I would say in response to the comment from Mr. Tierschrell is that the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan, which you adopted last year, does have an action to develop a site waste management and minimisation plan for construction and demolition waste. This proposal doesn't preclude that. You still can develop a site waste management and minimisation plan. The difference is what we provided in Action 3.4 had no detail around what that would look like. When we developed the bylaw, what we were trying to do is give it a regulatory focus by making it attached to a building consent. And what we've discovered is that that's not a workable element. Okay. We still can develop a template plan. We still can work with the building sector to take a more considered approach to diverting waste. It just wouldn't be in a regulatory focus. So I don't see that the action in the WIMP, the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan, is excluded. It's simply another tool that we can make use of.
So the reason for removing it is around not being able to enforce that action?
Primarily, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on that as well. I mean, my read of the report was that it is enforceable, but it would require legal action to enforce rather than other mechanisms. Is that the case?
Yes, and that's why I said it's primarily an enforcement question. What we've been looking for when we developed the draft bylaw that went out for consultation was trying to navigate the challenges we have around direct enforcement. Being able to attach it to a building consent gives us a significant tool to achieve compliance. Without that element, it becomes much harder. We would have to take court proceedings if someone chose not to submit a waste management and minimisation plan when they were undertaking this kind of work. And generally speaking, for that kind of an offence, it would be disproportionate.
But wouldn't even the threat of court proceedings be enough to get a high level of compliance amongst especially the well-established part of the development community?
Potentially, yes, but enforcement action generally follows a pyramid approach, and prosecution is generally the most extreme form of enforcement that we would take. I guess what we're looking at here when we consider this issue of minimising C&D waste is looking at other actions we can take in the first instance before we progress to that. I guess we could say that there is an option for exploring that enforcement option at a later date if this initiative wasn't going to be successful. But the fact that it is working very well in Hawke's Bay gives us confidence that that's an appropriate approach.
Yeah, so in terms of a later date, what's the current year on the bylaw?
So the next minimum requirement for reviewing the bylaw will be 8 years from now, but there is a new Waste Minimisation Act being developed by the Ministry for the Environment, and it's likely we'll have to review our bylaw in line with any changes to the Act once that comes through, and that's somewhere in the next 18 months. So we may be looking at an earlier review anyway.
Thanks. In terms of the options that you've put to us on the report, you're basically giving us an approve option and a don't approve option. Is there a third option there around taking this to a workshop or actually having a chance to work through some of the construction demolition options that could actually be seen at least to give effect to what's in our plan?
Through Mr. Chair, absolutely. There's always an option to pause this work. There isn't a statutory timeframe that we're working to under this, except that we started this piece of work, I think it was about 2021, and it's been pushed back while we got other pieces of work underway. We can absolutely pause it, come back to you with more information or a workshop. If there were further significant changes, it possibly would require further consultation, depending on what those changes were. But that is absolutely an option for you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Peter, can I just ask that the vice versa to that if we were to adopt this and then still put a subsequent recommendation to follow through on the demolition waste and to incorporate it later, would we be required to consult again on the whole bylaw rather than having it as an appendices to or an attachment to this piece of work?
So one approach you could take is to adopt the bylaw today, and further work can be undertaken around construction and demolition waste options. If you got to the end of that piece of work and wanted to make a further change to the bylaw, you can amend it, and you could consult on that amendment. That would be more targeted, perhaps, than a full review of the entire bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zua-Ballin.
Thank you. Just on your answer to a question from Councillor Barrett, if we made significant changes to what was proposed, we'd need to reconsult. Is not what's proposed here and the amendments that have been proposed here a significant change from or withdrawal of what we'd proposed?
I'd argue not, because what we proposed was going to add to what is an existing requirement. It wasn't an existing requirement that we have at the moment. So we put something forward. The council, our recommendation is that it doesn't proceed with it. Generally what we're required to do when we reconsult is if we are adding to an existing requirement that we are already delivering, that we haven't foreshadowed in our consultation.
But my understanding is what we'd proposed were methods by which we could give effect to what we'd set out to do in the WIMP. And it seems like this might be seen as reneging on that somewhat.
Well, as I mentioned in my earlier response, what is included in the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan isn't precluded by our advice here. We still can develop a site waste management and minimisation plan. The difference is how we would deliver it. We had been looking at a regulatory focused option for that by attaching it to a building consent requirement. What we've discovered is that that's not a practical approach. We still have the ability to develop a template site waste management and minimisation plan. We still can promote that. We can still encourage people to make use of it. It's the regulatory element that we feel is unworkable at this stage.
Thank you. So, I don't know if you heard the public comment this morning, but we sort of got accused of putting this in the too hard basket again, you know, and that kind of, I'm wanting to test how far that is the case. We've got a solution and said, no, it is too hard. We need to try kind of a softer approach. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Through Mr. Chair, I wouldn't say it's been put into the too hard basket. When we look at any of these issues, we're trying to look for the most practical solution, the one that's going to have the greatest chance of success. We know that construction and demolition waste is a significant portion of the waste stream, and we're trying to find the most effective ways to divert that out from the waste stream. The regulatory option that we put forward came in rather late into our drafting process, and we didn't have sufficient time to test how effective that would be. Through the consultation process, though, a number of issues became clearer, and we were able to test it a little further, and our advice at this point is that it's not going to be workable. But there are alternatives to what we have put forward, and what we're suggesting at the moment is that the alternative, similar to what's been proposed, what Hawke's Bay currently do, is more likely to be successful in this regard. So it's not that we're putting it in the too hard basket, we're simply looking at an alternative approach that we think would be more successful.
An easier basket. Just in relation to one of the other comments that was made this morning about having consistency of requirements for operators, I just wondered if you had any comments in response to that. The consistency between the standard that council requires being applied across other operators.
Yeah, so there is, I think it's condition 10 in the administration manual for the licensing. We give a number of examples of the kinds of conditions that we can apply, but it's not an exclusive list. So we do have the ability to add other conditions, and that could be setting a minimum diversion target. I guess the difficulty we have is how do we make that effective? To put the council in the position of auditing or requiring the collectors to audit the contents of their waste stream could be potentially resource intensive. We haven't gone into that in detail at this point. As we work through the details of the licensing system, that's something we can certainly look at.
Okay, thank you. So just to reiterate what someone else had asked, if we wanted to pause this or lie this on the table just to understand those other alternatives, that would be, there's no statutory deadline or hurry for us to get this approved?
No, so the only statutory deadline we had to meet was when the council made its decision that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of dealing with these problems, which it did, I believe, back in 2021. That fulfilled its review requirement. The drafting that's happened since is simply giving effect to the outcome of that review. So it is possible to leave this to be decided at a later date.
Okay, so we could feasibly sort of take our time to make sure we've got a degree of comfort that we've got the bylaw provisions right. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Chair. Just prompted a bit by your approach that you were suggesting, just in terms of cost for additional cycles of consultation if we ended up in a situation where we adopted most of the bylaw today, but then ended up out consulting again in a few months' time. What would be the likely cost of doing that approach?
Generally speaking, the consultation that we undertake for bylaws is far from the Rolls-Royce approach, I would say. We have a fairly tried and true method. It's generally in the region of a few $1,000s. It's not generally a significant major expense. But I would note probably the other cost is opportunity cost. So as we continue to work on this project, our ability to deliver other projects may have to be delayed.
Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, just prompted by Councillor Bellon's questions. There seems to me to be no rhyme or reason why you have to reconsult after consulting on a bylaw. So I remember distinctly with the gambling policy that we had, trying to remove the sinking lid, which was the status quo, was seen as a change we had to reconsult on, and therefore we weren't able to do it. But you're telling me, in answer to Councillor Zabellan, that because the status quo is we don't have a trade waste regulatory bylaw approach, that we don't need to reconsult on that because that is the status quo, which seems the opposite of the advice we've been given in the chamber before. So I just need to understand, is there any actual framework we're operating in when we decide whether we need to reconsult after consulting a bylaw, or is it just at the discretion of the team that are putting the bylaw to us?
So, to provide a bit of clarity, the general test that we apply when we consider whether we will need to reconsult is whether we have understood the views of the community of the alternative that's been considered in terms of the alternative change. It is always going to be a subjective test here, so you're right, up to a certain point, it is at the discretion of the officer in terms of making that recommendation. Ultimately, it's your decision as council as to whether or not you believe we should consult or not reconsult. In this situation here, I think my advice would be that further consultation isn't required, but if you believe that we should reconsult, then that's absolutely your decision.
Got you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, I see I'm the last in the queue. If I may, I'd like to just move a motion, I've got a seconder here, that that's not on the table, that we take this to we lie it on the table, we take it to a further workshop, pending all the unanswered questions of the officers. And I'm with some of my colleagues that there's a few things that need to be checked out first before we sign away a backward step, in my opinion.
Okay, we'll take that as a procedural motion to lie this on the table until workshops planned and conducted, and ask for a seconder. We have a councillor Zabellan. Actually, we had concluded the questions. Actually, Peter, can I thank you for presenting this report? It's a fine line. There was no other queue for the questions, and I'm going to accept the procedural motion. It's up to the committee to accept it or not. It's been seconded. There's no further speakers, and so I'm required now to put that procedural motion. Yeah, until workshops. Mr Mayor, are you happy with that procedural motion, that the report lie on the table and a workshop be organised? Yep, they're both, the mover and the seconders accepted that. Now I'd like to invite a vote on the procedural motion before us. That's passed, 9 votes for and 4 against. That concludes that item for today. Councillor Johnson, you suggesting a point of order?
Just under Standing Order 2.14.1, the procedural motion is to terminate or adjourn debate, which starts by saying any member who has not spoken on the matter under debate, but the matter wasn't actually under debate, we were still in questions. So I just querying the ruling to accept your acceptance that we would put a procedural motion when we weren't actually under debate.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I thought that I kind of rounded that off before we went further with it, that there was no other in the queue for questions. You would have seen that on your own devices. And so it was, the fine line is such that the interpretation that the Mayor had queued himself in a speaking position before I had asked the officer to leave the table, I see that quite being marginal. And I did say before we took the vote that it's up to the committee to decide the acceptance of the procedural motion, and it's now passed 9 votes to 4. So that is my view and concludes this item for now. Thank you for the point of order. That moves us now on to item 12 and invite Peter Ridge back to the table. This is the draft Speed Management Plan 2025 approval for consultation. Peter Ridge is the Acting Manager for Strategy and Finance. And we also might have Steve James, Principal of Safety Engineer from Urban Connection, on Teams if needed. And James also, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just sent a message to Mr. James to let him know. And he is online, yeah, I see this, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this item is to recommend that the committee approve the draft speed management plan for consultation. This has been in development for the last few months. There was a meeting at the previous committee to set out the scope, and so we've prepared a draft speed management plan in accordance with that scope. There are three main components. The first is the inclusion of variable speed limits for schools. This is a statutory requirement. There are very few factors that we can alter, but there are a few, which is why we believe it's appropriate to take this out for consultation. In particular, the specific length of roads that are included as variable speed limits, the use of static versus electronic signage, and making sure that we've captured the areas correctly. There are two other areas that we have included as urgent changes, as noted in the scope. The first is an intersection speed zone, or ISZ, for Longben-Rongatia Road and number 1 line. And the second one is a speed limit change for Te Wanaka Road, and this relates to the development of Kekewhenua. One of the conditions of that development was lowering of the speed limit on State Highway 56. So we have engaged with NCTA and sought their agreement to install an ISZ on State Highway 56 as well, which would lower the speed limit to 60 kilometres per hour whenever there's traffic waiting on Te Wanaka Road. And to support that, our proposal is to lower the speed limit on Te Wanaka Road to 50 kilometres per hour, recognising the transition to an urban environment. So if approved, this will go out to consultation. We've scheduled consultation to begin 1 November following the election. Would run for a 6-week period with hearings to follow in likely February and deliberations in April next year, so that it can be completed by 30 June next year, which is the statutory deadline for the variable speed limits for schools. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Open it up. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much, Peter. Have you had any discussions with the developers of Kekewhenua about this consultation process, or would that be part of the consultation process?
That'll be part of the consultation process.
So no discussion prior to it?
Not at this stage, no.
Okay, so they've got no idea that this is coming?
I'll have to pass on to Keegan Appleton.
Kia ora koutou, Keegan Appleton, Senior Planner. So I think through the consenting pre-application process, we've been keeping regular updates on a variety of infrastructure servicing matters with them. So yes, I would confirm that we would be discussing with them on those, or having had discussed with them those options to proceed with.
So as part of them doing the development, they knew that the road would go down to a different level of speed?
Prior to rezoning, they knew that that was necessary, yeah. And then I suppose the mechanics of getting to that point we've been discussing through pre-apps.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Peter. Just interested in terms of how we treat multi-school areas within the city and what the criteria are there around kind of having an overall zone versus kind of zoning around specific schools.
So generally when we've been putting these proposals together, we've been mindful where the schools are in close proximity to each other. So you'll see there are some maps where there's more than one school included. If there are schools in very close proximity to each other, sometimes the variable speed limit is extended to a natural coverage of those school entrances. But compared, compared to the proposals we had in the previous speed management plan, which was out for consultation, where there were also permanent speed limit changes, the coverage isn't quite as extensive in these proposals.
And why is it less extensive here?
Because there's a tighter requirement around what we're allowed to do. So it's under the rule, a maximum 300 metres outside the school gate on any road. But there may be some situations, I believe, Ruahine Street may be an example, where the entrances of the schools, the 300 metres distance overlaps to some extent, or there might be a very short gap between the two stretches of road, and it makes logical sense to extend it slightly to cover in a logical way both those entrances.
What do one of these variable speed signs cost?
Might let James answer that question.
Through the chair, the cost will vary depending on whether they are electronic or static signage. So the static signs, which is very similar to the existing fixed speed limits, which just have some text underneath, will be considerably cheaper than the electronic. I don't have those details at the top of my head, but I just got a nod from the GM infrastructure. He could probably follow up.
Councillors, Glenn O'Connor, Acting GM Infrastructure. As James alluded to, the costs do vary from a static sign, $400 or $500, $600 or $700, something in that order. The electronic signs, depending on where they are and depending on how much services are nearby, if we need to do hydrovac excavation with a specialised excavator as we're putting the concrete footings in, considerably more expensive, but they can be anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12,000, something in that order, for the electronic signs to supply and install.
Thanks. So then, working with those kind of numbers, by breaking some of these zones apart, how much extra cost are we loading on to this process?
We haven't done that calculation. Steve, who is online, might be able to give us an indication based upon the work he's done looking at the schools.
Are you there, Steve? Floor's yours. Oh, wait a minute. We're just going to increase your volume. We couldn't hear you. If you'd like to start again.
Yeah, can you just ask the question again, please, so I can fully understand it?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. What I'm trying to get at is the last time we consulted with the community, we had a kind of overall effect where we had schools close to each other, and we had kind of signs at the perimeter of that overall zone. Here we've got some cases where that's been broken apart, and we put kind of full signage around two schools that are still quite close to each other. My first assumption is that that's increasing the number of signs that we're having to look at installing, and my question is, how much extra cost is that approach loading into this relative to the prior approach?
I can't answer that one. I don't know what the cost was that was proposed for the previous set of signs that were going to be installed prior to the previous speed limit change. So I really can't say how much the difference is.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that reply. So to your point that there's some very strict guidance from NZTA around this, if we get a message back from the community that they would like this to either be done more cost effectively, or they would like to see it done in a way that makes more sense from a traffic point of view, where you don't have very short changes between kind of multi-school areas, what ability do we as a council have to respond to community?
In respect of the variable speed limits for schools, we have very limited ability to respond to significant alternatives proposed by members of the community through the consultation process. The requirements are that we're required to apply a 30 km/h variable speed limit outside the school gate for a distance of 300 metres. There is some discretion to extend that, as I mentioned before. If the community, for instance, wanted us to make those permanent speed limits, under the rule at the moment, we don't have that ability to do so. If the suggestions were significantly different from that, I can't speculate to what they might be. We can look at those things, but the rule requires us to put in a variable speed limit. So it would be a variable speed limit plus anything else that we were able to make effective under the rule. And in the cases of these schools, that would be quite limited.
Thanks. And just finally then, can you take us through the specific Boys High Central Normal example? Just looking at the maps, it looks like there might be a kind of 100 or maybe 200 meter space where you go, 30, 50 back to 30. Like, it just seems like there's a lot of clutter and extra signs coming into an already quite busy part of the network for 100 meters of 50 Ks. And I'm really trying to understand the rationale around the separation of speed zones for Central Normal and Boys High.
So this might be a question to put to our consultant, Steve James, but just to give Steve a chance to bring himself up to the right page, which the note is page 235 of the agenda, Steve. My instinct is that the gap between Central Normal School and Palmerston North Boys High is through that intersection. We've said there's an ability to sort of adjust that 300 metre requirement. It's probably the gap between those two areas is too long for it to represent something that we could get away with in terms of an adjustment to the 300 metres. But this is where I'll probably ask Steve to provide a bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting and busy environment. And yeah, there probably could be an opportunity to extend the zone if we needed to, but as we extend it to cover the other area, it's going to need additional signs, because the signs are there to remind people to slow down. However, if they're too far apart, people won't slow down. So if we extend the zone past the 300 meters, we're going to need more repeater signs. Now, they don't need to be electronic, they can be fixed signs so that it saves on cost. So just bear that in mind. Extending these might increase the cost of them as well. Does that answer the question?
That does. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Zebba-Bellin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think my question is probably for Liz. It's about the comms plan, in which you have outlined what the community engagement plan is going to be. And then in the conclusion there, it also talks about the dealing with the disadvantages of this consultation in terms of limited scope for change, etc. And with the potential confusion of this consultation being similar to one we've done previously. Just wondered how we're framing that messaging so that it's very, very clear why we're doing this again. Essentially, it is addressed in the consultation document, but for the members of the public who maybe aren't going to be reading through that in a great amount of detail, how are we framing that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I might provide the first response and can add to that if needed. So yes, I think what we were saying there is we're acknowledging that we're in a position of consulting on a proposal that is similar but not the same as what we've done in the past. And as we've heard today, there is often frustration in the community when we ask them similar questions many times. They can feel like they're not being listened to. So I think we want to be very careful through how we pitch this, through our media releases, through social media posts, that we are in a different position than we were in 2023. This is a different proposal. There are similarities, but we are consulting on something quite different, and we have different requirements that we have to meet. I think it's more about acknowledging a limitation that we're working under rather than suggesting there's an alternative way that we could approach this. We will do the best we can to make sure that people aren't feeling unheard through this process, and we'll see how we get through with that.
Thank you. I think the other thing is just encouraging them to actually give feedback on this as well, and not, you know, while you may have given feedback previously, please do also have a read of what we're saying now as well. Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one very quick question. In terms of electronic signs versus static signs, is there any kind of guidance in terms of what signs should be located around certain roading conditions?
So through the chair, as part of this process, we did discuss this with Steve about kind of, I guess, some guidance we were setting on it. So the main focus was kind of in terms of electronic signage, it was busy roads, high vehicle use, or high pedestrian activities. So Botanical Road, Ruahine, if there's a location where there's existing signs, they're exploring whether or not we can just update those and just change the numbers. So that was the focus, whereas more quieter residential streets was preferred for static signs where that kind of infrastructure might not be as necessary.
So based upon the information that's provided in the draft at the moment there, we could probably do a reasonable calculation in terms of potential cost.
Yeah, and while following on from Councillor Barrett's question, I just had a quick conversation with James just to remind myself of the estimated overall cost for installation of these signs, and I think it's in the region of about $600,000. And we do get partial subsidy from NZTA towards that cost. For reference, with the 2023 SMP proposal that we put forward, we had estimated the cost for installing permanent and variable speed limit signs for the schools. I think it was at just under 1.2 million, so the cost here is approximately half.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you to you both, and to you also, Steve, isn't it? I just want to get that correct. For being available online, that concludes questions. Open it up to the meeting if there's somebody who wants to move the recommendations before us. Councillor Wood, and seconder? Councillor Johnson. Councillor Wood, do you want to speak to the recommendation? The service has stopped. Won't be a minute. We're good now. Floor's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hadn't intended to move this. I haven't got much to say other than I think it's good to be in a position we can put this draft speed management plan out. It will be useful to get those variable speed limits around schools. I certainly had some concerns around permanent 30k speed zones, partly due to the cost, as Councillor Hancock outlined through his questions to our officers, but partly due to the potential practical workings of how that might look. It has been a few years since we last consulted on the community with this, but Councillor Ballin raises a fair point around, will some people view this as having to go back out? At the end of the day, there's been a change of government since the last plan was there, so it's one of those things that we don't have much of a choice on, unfortunately, but it is a very fair concern, and so I have confidence that the comms team will do as much as they can to mitigate that concern and get it out in front of the most people, or as many people as they possibly can, in going through this process. But I look forward to seeing the result of public consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Very happy to second this. I'm supportive of it going out for consultation, and I actually think that had we had the opportunity to do this when we first put this to the public, we might have gone out on this. But at that time, as I recall, you weren't able to have a variable speed limit for 30. So we were constrained in what we could do before. I think the introduction of the school speed zones has been generally well received, particularly by parents and children who are attending the schools. But so it's not a new concept for people that you might have to slow down as you pass a school. So I think it'd be good to get the feedback on this rather than not. I see that there is possibly an option, but I think given that we've bundled up the other two road changes as well, it'd be sensible to go out. I don't expect we'll get heaps and heaps of feedback, but we'll then have covered our statutory obligations, so I'm very happy to support.
Thank you. And now I invite a vote. Oh, Councillor Barrett, sorry, I didn't see you come in. The floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair. Always good to introduce a bit of intriguing and interest into a meeting at this stage. I will be voting in support of this, but there is a certain level of frustration in me, at least on this, in terms of we had a quite thorough conversation with the community not that long ago, and that gave us a consistent result across every school in the community, which was about a 2-to-1 support, and I expect that we'll probably end up with a very clear signal of support here again. So I think, you know, having to go back out to community again on this is a little bit frustrating to me, and seeing you know, things get just reworked when I think reworking wasn't really needed. And in some cases, I think that reworking's taking us backwards instead of forwards, and particularly around where we do have schools in reasonably close geographic proximity. I felt that the prior proposal was actually much more intuitive for a road user, whether they be in a car or otherwise, to work through groups of schools in our community, whereas what I've seen on paper in this proposal looks like more confusion than's needed for road users in some cases, where you've got leaving one school zone and entering another school zone within a couple hundred meters, which seems to me a case for having a more overall approach to those speed zone areas. So not entirely happy with where this proposal's gotten to before going out, but I will be interested to see what response we get back from the community around the priority for improving safety around our school zones.
Thank you. And now that concludes comment. I'll invite a vote. Sorry? It's not working. What's happening? Lou, are you online to vote? Yeah, we're just voting to receive. Okay, thank you, sir. That is passed unanimously, 13 votes for. Thank you. Moves us to the committee work schedule, and to take any questions of it. Councillor Johnson?
Just the vegetation framework, including the tree policy, has been outstanding for over 3 years now, and I see it's been pushed out again. Can I just understand what's happening at the moment with tree maintenance, or if a tree needs to be removed? Have we still got a moratorium on tree removal? I'd be interested to know what's happening.
Can I refer that to who? Glenn O'Connor?
Thank you, Councillor. We are removing trees where they are dead and unsafe. There's currently a process involved where our Chief Executive signs off on any tree removals, and certainly for the interest of public safety, where and when they needed to be removed, they are removed, and tree maintenance throughout our city is ongoing.
Okay, so is it just a resourcing issue that it's been pushed back again?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there was good progress made on a draft to maybe 75%, but the officer working on that has been redirected to a lot of growth related plan changes to minimise consultancy costs. So we'll be picking up that work again shortly. There is existing direction in the current vegetation framework around tree removal. I appreciate that there's been a number of comments over a number of years about the appropriateness or otherwise of that criteria, but as the GM Infrastructure said, there is a process in place to make sure that those are carefully considered in the intervening period. But we'll look to bring that work back most likely in the early part of 2026.
Given that we've already had an elected member workshop on this, and as you say, you know, the policy is quite far advanced, is there not a risk in bringing it back to a new council that some of it's going to have to be reworked?
There's always a possibility of that with any work when there's an election. It's just been a case of prioritising that work and making best use of the professional services budget that's available.
Okay. Thank you. I will have a comment there.
Okay. I'll move that the strategy and finance receive the work schedule dated August 25, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for comment. Councillor Johnson.
Look, I am just a bit frustrated at the length of time this work's been on the books. Actually, my maths was wrong. It's 4 years, not 3. And given that a lot of work has been done on this policy, we've had an elected member workshop, and it was sort of almost about to be delivered. I'm a bit disappointed that we can't even get through work like this within a term of council. So I'm just, putting that on record.
Thank you. I think it's a fair point. I'd like to invite a vote to receive the work schedule. That's passed. 12 votes for and 1 against. That brings us back to another submitter who wishes to be heard in regards to our proposal at Linklater Reserve Dog on Lead area, and invite Beth Weir to come forward, which is submission 575, to speak. Can I just share that you have 5 minutes to share? And just come forward. Welcome. Just press the button to the right. Thank you, Pat, for assisting.
Thank you.
Just when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Beth Weir, and I would like to speak with respect to the reserve recommendation, or that's before you, about keeping it open as a reserve or cutting it off in half. I don't think I can add anything to what you've already been told, but I want to say this, that I have lived a lot of my life outside of New Zealand, and I have been to some pretty skunky dog parks. And what I want to impress upon you is that this particular dog park is the gem of gems. If you are a dog owner, it is heavenly. I mean, I know Scruffy and Atlas and Mavis, and I know their owners, and it's a big social event when you go there because everybody is so free to run around and so free to just be a dog and be a person. So I don't think I'm going to take 5 minutes, but I just want to impress upon you what a special and unique place that is. And I have met many, many foreigners there who say to me, wow, I've never been to a place like this. So it's part of, I appreciate those people who live close by want to have it as a park, but I personally have never had any problems with a dog in the park or with any of the owners in the park. And it's just, as I said, something that's quite unique, and I think Palmerston North should hang on to it as a full-run reserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. I'll open it up if there are any questions. There have been none. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That leaves us to another pause in the hearing. We have 2 further that we've had confirmed that wish to speak after 4 and one certainly of those two after 4:30, which gives us still a bit more space. So I intend to move into part 2, items 16, 17 and 18, public excluded for third-party commercial activities and negotiations. And look for a seconder. Seconder, Councillor Naylor, and invite a vote. Do we need a couple minutes to turn around the vote? Yep. That's passed unanimously, 11 votes for, none against. This just give us 3 or 4 minutes just to turn around the room for the administrators.